Hello, and welcome to Virtual Birding, where, as you can see, we're already started this morning with some Canada geese flying overhead. This morning we're at Manassas National Battlefield in Northern Virginia, which is a place where several Civil War battles were fought, and is also a place that is very near and dear to my heart. But I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. For now, we'll take a look at our target bird. And for today, I'm going a little bit more ambitious with the Eastern Meadowlark. So we'll be looking for that yellow belly and chunky body, little white on the edge of the tail, that little black V on the breast, and that'll be our meadowlark. It maybe won't be quite as bright yellow as the one there in the book in breeding plumage, but we'll see what we can find. This is a little bit more ambitious than most of our birds of the day. I know for a fact that there's Eastern Meadowlarks here somewhere, but it's definitely going to be a little trickier to find than our past target birds. If I wanted to play it a little more safe and still go with a grassland bird, I think I would have gone with Savannah Sparrow, but having 3 target birds in a row to start the channel as a sparrow seems maybe not the best move. We're starting our walk here at the Stone Bridge parking lot, which is an area that I tend to find a lot of birds in the morning, and then we'll be taking the first Manassas Trail. This is more or less the route we're going to take, but as I'll get into earlier, we ended up going on a little bit of a detour, but that's alright. We'll talk about that when we get there. For now, here's some more Canada geese going overhead, probably leaving wherever they roosted for the night and going out into the fields to feed. Now that we're looking that direction, I can see some birds sitting on the tree line. Some larger birds that I think are probably turkey vultures. Their heads are pretty small, much smaller than I'd expect out of a hawk, but it's really hard to tell when they're that backlit. This parking lot tends to be pretty good, and we've already got some birds moving around here, starting with this song sparrow. Got a lot of geese still going over, so I don't know. We'll take one more look. Geese in the sunrise, and then we'll get back to seeing if we can find a few more of these songbirds around the edge of the parking lot. I often find it's pretty difficult to get out of this parking lot sometimes in the morning, and a northern mockingbird is a pretty good pickup. That's a bird that I see pretty regularly here at the battlefield, but is sort of hard to come across in some other places. Start making our way to the head of the trail, but I still think I see some birds moving around this area. Looks like something up in the sycamore there, so we'll take a quick look. And we have a yellow-rumped warbler. Definitely a nice little bird to get us started, and one that I often get in the parking lot here first thing in the morning in the winter, and sometimes don't really get later on the trail, so nice thing to get here early in the morning. We'll start making our way down the trail towards the stone bridge, but we'll keep an eye on this tree line as there's often birds around. I see a little bit of movement there. Song sparrow calling, and sure enough, it's a song sparrow. Pretty good look at one though, so that's always nice. There does seem to be a little bit more going on here, so we'll take a look, see if we can find something else. Another yellow-rumped warbler, or possibly the same one, having moved over from the sycamore tree. And something over there at the top of those trees. And there's a nice male bluebird. A little backlit, but you can still see that bright orange chest and blue body. And the female, which is a little bit more subdued, just off to his right. Still birds calling in here. Some birds flying over. Looks like a robin. You can sort of get that from the shape of the bird and the way it flies, but seeing birds in flight like that is definitely a skill that you have to practice to get good at. Let's see. Looks like something else up there. Ah, nice, a purple finch. There seems to be quite a few of them around this winter. It's definitely nice to see, but you see that nice broad eye stripe, unlike the house finch that we saw last week. And looks like a white-throated sparrow. Definitely am expecting to see quite a few of them today, so good to get our first one, but definitely more to come, probably better looks. Just up ahead we have the Stone Bridge, which is one of the landmarks in the park that people will come to see, and is also a place that I see a lot of people taking photographs. For me, I see it as an excellent birding opportunity, as right here along the river often tends to be some good birding. And there we have a bird down along the edge there. Ah, that's a much better look at a purple finch, and this one's eating some berries. Also sounds like we had some goldfinches going overhead. Hopefully we can get a look at them later. Start making our way onto the bridge. The river that this bridge goes over is Bull Run, and the two battles that were fought here you may recognize from your high school history books as the First and Second Battle of Bull Run. Often around here they call them the First and Second Battle of Manassas. And looking down along the river, it looks like a bunch of birds moving. Sounds like white-throated sparrows, but we'll take a look. And yeah, white-throated sparrows, so we were right about that. The other side of the river, seems like there might be some birds moving over here as well. I feel like there's something on the back side of this tree here. And it looks like a downy woodpecker. Got that very small bill, and depending on how it turns, you can catch a little bit of the barring underneath the tail. Some white-throated sparrows singing. And I see some birds on the ground down there, so maybe that's the white-throated sparrows. Oh no, it's a junco. They often move with the white-throated sparrows, so that makes sense, but definitely nice to pick up another bird here along the river. Oh, there's a song sparrow singing. Always pretty funny in the winter. Alright, we'll keep making our way down the trail. Ahead you can see another trail going off to the right, and that's actually where we'll come back and see something moving in there. Ah, something big. It's a white-tailed deer. I had sort of just caught the flash of their ears, that little bit of white. I thought there might have been a bird back there, but looks like deer. So that's a nice find, our second mammal for virtual birding. Keep making our way along. Doesn't seem like these deer are too terribly afraid of people, so I don't think we're going to bother them as we pass. I mentioned that this battlefield has a special place in my heart, and the reason for that is that prior to doing virtual birding and the job that I do now in real life, I did many years of seasonal bird fieldwork, where I would work for a variety of universities around the US and in fact around the world, doing about 3-month stints at a time studying birds and collecting data for them. The very first place that I ever did this was Manassas Battlefield. That work was done in the winter, on days not unlike today, and so that is how I know for sure that there's Eastern Meadowlarks here somewhere at the park. However, actually finding them, I also know might be difficult. But before we get to that, I'm hearing a bird up in the tree, and there's a brown creeper. Very cool. Basically a little piece of bark moving on the trunk of a tree. That is a brown creeper. But there's some other things up here too. Looks like another bird that likes walking on the trunks of trees, a white-breasted nuthatch. I definitely heard a titmouse as well, but I don't see it. It does look like some motion up there. But yeah, but that's a red-bellied woodpecker, so that's not our titmouse. Still good to pick up. Then what do we have here? Looks like another downy woodpecker with that really small bill. Should get some haries here somewhere in this park. There's definitely around, so we'll have to keep our eyes open for that. But so far, all downies. Keep making our way along the boardwalk. See what else we can find, and a little bit of motion there in that snag. is a eastern gray squirrel. Looks like it actually might also be eating at some of that fruit. It's at least eating something up there. It's hard to tell. This boardwalk is actually a pretty good spot if you come here in the summer, particularly late summer, to look for tree frogs. Primarily I've found gray tree frogs here, but I've also seen a couple green tree frogs right along the edge. I don't ever really leave the boardwalk itself because it can get pretty wet in this area, but right along the edge, if you kind of keep an eye in the leafy green saplings and even to some extent the sort of thicker clumps of grass, sometimes there'll be tree frogs in there, which is pretty fun. Going back to what we were talking about earlier, working here at this park with grassland birds was a really great experience, especially very early in my career. It is a place that has excellent grassland bird habitat, and the park knows it, and was very interested in what we had to say about how to manage the grasslands in the way that was best for the grassland birds that spend the winter here. Grassland birds were a group that I had spent some time with prior to this job and was definitely familiar with, but it's a group that can be pretty tricky and is very tricky to see here from the trails. And so it was fun to get a little bit of extra experience with them, learn the birds a little bit better, learn sort of where to find them, what was the best places to find them, and to even learn a little bit about the grass itself. But we can talk a little bit more about that later because we're coming up to the first field now, and this field tended to be really good for Eastern Meadowlarks. However, looks like today it is mowed, which definitely doesn't help our chances, but there is a bird flying over there. And it's definitely a crow, but it doesn't appear to be calling, so it's kind of hard to tell if that is an American crow or a fish crow. But this grass being mowed definitely hurts our chances at Meadowlark, but there's a bigger field sort of out beyond that tree line, so it's not our last chance here. And really that field out there tended to be better than this smaller one. Couple of birds in the tree. Looks like we got a blue jay and some American robins. There goes the blue jay, and it's replaced by a flicker. Flicker is a bird that we've heard a couple times on our virtual birding adventures, but we haven't actually seen one, so that is a nice thing to see. We'll keep making our way along. Looks like there's a group of birds in flight up there. Take a look at them. And it looks like gulls. Looks like it's almost all American herring gulls. They're real big and bulky. There's juveniles that are real dark. But there is a ring-billed gull in with them, that sort of second bird from the front. Much smaller, kind of flaps a little bit different. The head and bill, much less bulky. So a really nice way to get both species and get them together so they're easy to compare. Oftentimes in flight, it can be pretty difficult to tell which gulls are which. There goes a red-bellied woodpecker, calling, which helps, but doesn't look like it landed anywhere near us, so we'll keep moving. As we get up here beyond this tree line, we can check this next field. But yeah, it looks like it is mowed as well, so we'll keep moving. They definitely mow a subsection of the fields here every year, and always have, but there's always some long grass that's still around, so I expect we'll run into some at some point. There's quite a few fields ahead to check. Right now there's some birds up in the tree, kind of a big chunky bird, could be a meadowlark, but no, it's an American robin. I don't think that's the only bird that was here. I felt like I saw a flock of birds over to the left as well, so we'll take a look at those. And it looks like European starlings. Pretty distant, but you can kind of see the shape, that sort of pointy bill, short tails. A lot of people don't really like starlings as they are an invasive species. And I'll admit, I don't really like their effects on some of the native species as well, but I will say, in the winter, when they have all the little white dots, they are very pretty. I think seeing them in Europe, where they belong, you would think of them as a very pretty bird, but sometimes with species that aren't native, it's just a little tougher to love them, even if they are very pretty. Well, with this field being mowed, I don't really think we're gonna find Meadowlark here. They tend to not be in this habitat, but there is another field across the street, so we'll head that way and take a look there. First, there's a crow again flying across. Ah, yep, and you can hear that sort of nasally call, so that is a fish crow. It's good to pick up our second crow for virtual birding, and our first one that we were able to identify today. I suspect that means we're going to get both crows, as American crow tends to be easier, and so I'll be kind of surprised if we don't run into one at some point today. This road can be pretty busy, so oftentimes I'll get stuck here a lot, watching fast cars go by, but we got lucky and got straight across today. And we'll head up to these fields, which are also mowed. Now, before the park gets a bunch of hate about all of these mowed fields, I'll put a stop to that right away and say there's definitely good grassland habitat for grassland birds here. They definitely always manage for that. Whether we find those fields or not, I'm not sure, but they're definitely here. It's a big park, and we're going to cover less than half of it today, so we'll see. We'll see what we can find, but there's definitely good habitat that they've left for birds here. And there's a hawk in the tree line, and it's a Cooper's hawk, which is very cool. There's a couple birds flying through the background. Let's take a look at those quick, and then maybe we'll go back with the hawk. And it looks like more American herring gulls. So you can see that like real dark juvenile. The juvenile ringbills will be a little bit lighter, so that's a good hint, especially since all those birds are the same size. But they're also quite bulky, which you wouldn't expect in a ringbill. So that's how we'll identify them. Now, if we look at this Cooper's hawk, you can see it's got quite a long, thin tail, which something like a red-tailed hawk wouldn't have. But it also has a really long neck. And so the similar sharp-shinned hawk tend to have their heads really scrunched down on their body, and they don't really look like they have any neck at all. And so when you see a really long neck on a bird like that, it means it's probably a Cooper's hawk. Cooper's hawk's also the more common of the two here, but sharp-shinned can be around in the winter. A couple birds at the top of that tree, and we've got a few more bluebirds. Looks like another male and a female, and another male and a female, so two pairs hanging out there. Bluebirds are usually in pretty good numbers here in the park, so I can't say I'm too surprised to see quite a few of them. Keep making our way along the tree line. A couple of blue jays, white-throated sparrow, a lot of the sort of common things you'd expect. We'll definitely keep an eye on the grass. Even in short grass, it's possible to get grassland birds, but a little less likely. This field, from past experience working here, tended to not be super great anyways, so we're probably not missing a ton, but it's definitely going to be harder to see much in these shorter grass fields either way. Just not as much like that sort of mowed grass. Ah, robin singing up ahead. That's always fun to hear, especially in the winter. A lot of times that means a pretty decent flock and a lot of berries, so this little tree line edge might be pretty good for us here. We'll have to get up and check. I can hear quite a few robins. There goes a blue jay flying across. And that's not a blue jay there where I thought it landed, but it's a robin, but to be expected. Some birds over here on this tree line too. Looks like more starlings. That very short tail. White-throated sparrows calling. Looks like a bunch of the robins just took off. And looks like the starlings took off too. Yeah, there they go. Flying away. Yeah, it seems like most of the birds are in flight right now. I didn't see it, but maybe that Cooper's hawk just flew through. Seems to be the most likely explanation for why everything flushed, but hard to say without seeing it. But it seems like most of the things that were here have moved on now, except I guess maybe that blue jay call in there, so maybe we'll keep moving as well. There was something up in the tree, and it's a hermit thrush. That's very fun. They didn't stay around very long, but still a much better look than we saw in our first episode of virtual birding at Ellanor Park. It's a pretty low bar to jump, but we did it. That is a bird that's not completely obscured by brush, at least. There run a few birds through the air. I wasn't quite sure what those were naked eye, but maybe robins. Creek looks a little frozen over, so not expecting too many water birds there. Goes a robin over. You can see that one a little bit better, the shape. Keep making our way along. It's a little brushier over here, but this is a bit of longer grass. It's probably more fit for something like a field sparrow than a Eastern Meadowlark, but you never know. Definitely hear some white-throated sparrows, song sparrows calling in here. Oh, there's a towhee doing that 3 call that they do. That's worth a stop and a look. Yeah, and there it is. Nice male, all black. That 3 call is a pretty good mnemonic. I'm usually not a huge fan of mnemonics, but I feel like that's an easier one to learn. And that one definitely sounds like the mnemonic says. And sure enough, like I said, here's a field sparrow. That is the kind of bird I would expect here, with a little more brush in this grass. You know, I don't think we're going to get true grassland birds, but that one for sure. Ah, pileated woodpecker calling, but it sounds pretty far away. If we get one closer, we might get a look at it. And here's a song sparrow, so that pretty well rounds out all of the sparrows I would expect in this habitat. Flicker calling, but everything else that we haven't already seen sounds pretty far, so we'll keep making our way along. This is definitely a little bit longer grass. Some of this is a little more open, but probably not quite a big enough field for a meadowlark. We'll keep an eye out anyways, just in case. Nope, didn't look like anything there, so we'll head back into the woods. Now there's a hairy woodpecker. Hopefully we can get a good look at one of them at some point here, but good to pick it up at least by voice. Like the pileated, that one kind of sounded pretty far away, so I don't know that that is the one we're going to see, but we'll keep making our way along, and hopefully we'll find one that we can get a look at eventually. It's always more fun to see the birds than just hear them, even though both is nice. Little bit of motion up here. I'm hearing a lot of white-throated sparrows, so it might just be that. And yep, sure enough, white-throated sparrow. Oh, I did just hear a hermit thrush though. That first one went by pretty quick, so if we can get a better look, that would be nice. That isn't it, but that is our hairy woodpecker. I guess it did decide to fly in, so nice to pick that one up. Got that very long bill, making it pretty distinct from the downy woodpecker. And, there's the hermit thrush. Now that's a much better look. It's very fun to see thrushes in the winter. It's definitely a bird I associate more with the spring and the summer, but here in Virginia, you can get them all year round, which is pretty fun. And the hermit thrush is a very nice one, with that really red tail. Definitely a very pretty thrush. Yeah, there you can see the tail a little bit better as it flies off. Definitely one of my favorite thrushes, and one that I'm lucky enough to be able to see in the winter. Keep making our way along, see what else we can find. A little bit of motion up ahead in that brush pile. And it's another eastern gray squirrel. It's really the only squirrel that we have around here, so it makes for pretty easy identification. But we'll keep looking for birds and move through the forest here. I do really love these eastern forests. I grew up in forests like this, but I kind of took them a little bit for granted. And then when I moved out west, there's a little motion there. Might have been a squirrel. But anyways, I've lived out west a little bit where the trees just aren't quite the same as they are here in these eastern forests. Don't get me wrong, places like Montana do have beautiful forests and even more beautiful mountains, but the tree diversity there is pretty low, especially when it comes to these deciduous trees. And so you just don't really see as many different leaves, or the colors aren't as bright even on the ground as the leaves we see here. And I think there's something about the tree diversity in the east that's just really special, and something that I definitely took for granted. There's a little field off to the right, and I glanced out there, but it looked like it was mowed as well, so I didn't spend a lot of time. Very unlikely to find meadowlarks or even something like a savanna sparrow out in a field like that. However, there does seem to be something here. Take a look, and no, it is not something. That is just a leaf. I will say that is a birding experience if there ever was one. I feel like some days I end up looking at more leaves or things that look like birds that are just tangles or clumps in trees than I do actual birds, but I think that happens to everybody, so nothing to be too embarrassed about, so I didn't cut it out of the video, even though I suppose I could have. Well, we'll keep moving along here and hope our luck gets a little bit better and that we find fields that aren't mowed and birds that are actually birds and not just leaves. Just up ahead is the start of the field that we called the Cannon Field. So that is one of the best fields in the entire park. So I'm pretty hopeful that we'll find some good grassland habitat there. But before we do, there's a yellow-bellied sapsucker calling here. So let's try to get a look at that. We've heard one earlier, but I haven't gotten a look. And yeah, there it is. Oh, and look, it's actually drinking out of the sap wells. So sapsuckers get their name because they drill these little sap wells in the sides of trees. Not unlike we drill wells into maples to get maple syrup. So this bird is going to its sap wells, and that sap will have sort of seeped into those little holes that you can see, and it's drinking it out of there. So sapsucker, actually a pretty accurate name for that bird. You may have also noticed that they have a big white line down their wing, which is a pretty easy way to quickly recognize a sapsucker. Things like downy woodpeckers and hairy woodpeckers don't have that big white line, so if you see a bird land at a distance with your naked eye and you see that, you can pretty well know that it's going to be a sapsucker before you even raise your binoculars. But obviously if it's a sapsucker, you're probably gonna raise your binoculars because it's a pretty fun bird to see. So yeah, this is the start of the Cannon Field, and this part is mowed, which I would expect. Pretty close up here is the visitor center, and the area around the visitor center is almost always mowed. So I don't think I've ever seen this part of the field not mowed, so it's not really a surprise, and it's not necessarily where I expected to see things like meadowlarks or savanna sparrows. All the way up ahead, you can see the Visitor Center building. It's a spot that is definitely worth stopping if you come here on your own. The birding here is obviously really great, which is why I came here today, but there's also a lot of history here, obviously, being a national battlefield. And a lot of that can be seen at the Visitor Center. They have a lot of really great displays where they have both Civil War artifacts, but also a nice information board that kind of lights up with a map that shows you all the battles and how they went down, and it's pretty interesting stuff, honestly. Obviously, we're going to skip it today, but if you do come here, it's definitely worth the stop. I definitely recommend it. Maybe after you finish your walk and the birding's calmed down a little bit in the middle of the day, it's a spot you can come and check out. Alright, now we're going to head into sort of what the main part of the field that we called the Cannon Field is, and hopefully we'll run into some longer grass. Again, this part right around the visitor center, I'm not expecting it to not be mowed, but somewhere beyond the little house that's up ahead, I'm hoping we'll run into some long grass and get some nice grassland birds. Looks like a bird up ahead sitting in the tree. couple more crows. Again, hard to say around here with the two species if they don't make any noise. Oh, well, there you go. There they called off to our left. Sounds like American crow, so that puts that one to rest. While I was working here, I spent a lot of time watching crows in flight that I had already heard call and knew what they were to try to figure out if there was any difference between the two of them. And I kind of feel like fish crows sort of row their wings. They kind of throw them a little bit further forward when they flap rather than more up and down like an American crow. And so I do kind of feel sometimes like I can tell them apart just by the way they fly. But I would say when I guess, I'm probably only about 80% right, which really isn't a high enough percentage that I find it to be a particularly reliable field mark, but there might be something there. I'm not really sure. But what I am happy to see is that we're running into a bit of long grass here. So here's a nice field and one that I expect we could find our target bird. So we'll have to keep a good lookout. And there's something in the grass there, but that is a song sparrow. Which is no surprise really. From my experience working here, song sparrows were the most common birds we would find in our grassland surveys. But obviously that's not what we're looking for necessarily, so we'll keep a close eye out. See if we can find something else, something a little bit more of a true grassland bird. Something in those sticks. And yeah, another song sparrow. As I said, they're the most common, so no real surprise, but we'll keep looking. Getting a little warm, so take my gloves off as we walk and hopefully find some grassland birds. There's a bird there in the sky. Looks like another crow. American crow by the sounds of it. You can kind of see that sort of really up and down motion. I don't know if we'll run into another fish crow, but yeah. You can kind of, oh, Savannah sparrow. And yeah, kind of distant, but there it is. You can see its head shape's quite a bit different than a song sparrow. And the call note obviously helps quite a bit. Oh, American pipit. Somewhere up in the sky. Don't see it though. Ugh, seems like it just flew over. Nice pickup, but would have been nice to see it. They're a bird that I don't get very often here, and actually is a bird that you can get in some of the mode fields. So if we run into more mode fields, that would be something worth keeping an eye out for. Now, if you look at this grass, you can see how there's a real clump, how it kind of really clumps together. It's not like, you know, somebody's yard might be that all the grass grows completely evenly. You see at least the grass coming out as stalks is very clumped. And that's because this is a warm season grass. This was actually sort of the focus of our study, was comparing these warm season grass fields with cool season grass fields. Now, the warm season grass fields grow in the warmer months, and the cool season grass fields grow in the cooler months, as the names would suggest. And the cool season grass fields tend to be like your yard, where all the grass grows completely evenly, whereas these warm season grass fields grow in clumps, which gives more little pathways for birds to go and move around through the grass. And so we were trying to see if the birds preferred one field or the other, and in fact there was many more birds in these warm season grass fields. I think they just have a better opportunity to hide down in the clumps and have a much easier time moving through the grass. There's a couple birds flying up high. Looks like American robins. Birds in flight like that are pretty tough, I'll admit, but you can kind of tell from the shape of those that they're robins and how they flap their wings. If you ever get the chance to go to a place that they're doing visual migration counts of songbirds, it's a good opportunity to see a lot of birds in flight, and especially if there's somebody there that really knows what they're doing, that can tell you what things are, and then you really pay attention to their shapes and how their wings fly and how their wing beats, the timing of it, how fast, slow they are, that sort of thing. You can get pretty good at identifying birds in flight. But yeah, it's tough. But robin is one of the easier ones, and honestly, it's one of the ones that you see the most in the fall, especially. So it's kind of a good one to learn as a baseline. Well, now we're getting up into some of the more of the fields, but this section definitely seems mowed. Often this cannon field has some parts of it mowed and some parts of it not, so hopefully it's more not than mowed, but we'll see, especially once we get to the top of this hill. Yeah, looking like it is pretty mowed, which is a bummer, but I don't know. It is sort of luck of the draw, and I think we're just having a little bit of bad luck for grassland birds. Although we did get our Savannah sparrow already, and there's still opportunities to see other things, and there may be more fields up ahead that aren't mowed. But there's definitely grassland bird habitat here at the park. That is something they definitely value. But as I said, we're going to see less than half of it, and it's possible the half that we're not in has a bunch of nice grassy fields, and we just are in some of the areas that are a little bit more mowed. But I'm sure we'll still see quite a bit, and we've seen a few decent birds already, so hard to complain too much. Up ahead there's a fence line, which I spent a lot of time jumping over as we did our line transects in a sort of straight line trying to see these grassland birds. They tend to be pretty weedy because they can't mow as close to them, and so sometimes this can actually be pretty good spots to see birds. And it also looks like there's a bunch of long grass on at least one side of the trail here as well. We'll get up a little higher on this hill and look back down. Here's something at the top of the tree, and it's another eastern bluebird. But yeah, those fences tend to be kind of good spots, and they can be pretty good spots, especially in the spring, to look for meadowlarks where they sit up on the fence posts themselves. And so we'll definitely stop up here and take a look. Look back, see if we can look down into the grass a little bit better. Scanning, but yeah, didn't see anything. So we'll keep going. Looks like we ran out of long grass pretty quick, but there's another fence line down here. Could be good for something. Yeah, you can really see how brushy they are. Once again, we'll probably try to get up on the hill a little bit and then look back down. It's a little easier to see that way. If we scan the fence line, doesn't look like there's any meadowlarks sitting on it. But as we look up the hill, looks like there's a bird in the air. And it's a turkey vulture. You can see the real V of the wing, and you can see how it rocks back and forth. Pretty characteristic of a turkey vulture. And if it banks, you can kind of see the little bit of longer tail that a black vulture wouldn't have. We probably had turkey vultures this morning, but it's good to have one that we can count. And if we scan back down towards the fence, it does look like a bird has popped up on the fence, and it looks like a Savannah sparrow. Popping up like sometimes the eastern meadowlarks do, and a couple other sparrows flying past. Could have been Savannahs, but it's hard to tell. They went through so quickly. There's that crow that we heard calling earlier. And I think that's all that's here, so we'll keep moving. These cannons up here tend to be a pretty good spot to actually look for eastern bluebirds. We saw the one in the tree, so maybe that's where they are, but they really like sitting on these cannons, which is sort of funny. I don't see any of them sitting on there today, but it's a pretty fun picture if you're here to come try to find the bluebirds on the cannons. Looks like something out there on the juniper, and it looks like a northern mockingbird, a little further than the one we saw this morning. But the meadowlarks really like sitting on these junipers, so definitely worth the scan. You can see there was a trail that went off to the right there that's the way we should have gone if we would have stayed on the first Manassas trail, but I decided to take us on a little bit of a detour to scan these junipers up here and then also hit a couple other fields that I know about that are along the horse trail, sort of the yellow trail. It'll add maybe a little less than a mile to our birdwalk, but I think it might be worth it, especially if we can run across a couple more fields that have longer grass and maybe pick out some grassland birds. And if all those fields are mowed, maybe it'll just be a lot of extra walking, but I don't know. The exercise is good anyways. Another bird in the air, and it's another turkey vulture. See it rocking pretty good there. Small head. It's a Carolina wren calling up here pretty loud and pretty consistently. That's a bird that we've heard, I think, on every bird walk we've done so far, but actually haven't laid eyes on. And this one sounds like we might actually get a look at it. It is really calling. Let's see if we can find it. Looks like it might be there in the tree. And yep, there it is. There's our first Carolina wren that we've seen, at least. Didn't stick around for long, but that is a pretty good look, really. Alright, well, back into the forest. See if we can't find a few more forest birds before we get to the next field. Apart from that distant hairy woodpecker, this section of forest seems relatively quiet, but that's kind of just the way it is here in the winter. In the summer, there's a lot of birds that are kind of spread all through these forests, and they can be quite good. You might run into pine warblers in some of the little pine pockets, or Acadian flycatchers here and there in some of the deciduous forests, but in the winter, a lot of the birds are kind of flocked together, and so you're usually either seeing a mixed flock of songbirds, or you're seeing nothing at all. But we've run into a couple really nice pockets of birds, so we'll just have to keep our eyes open, and hopefully we'll run into a couple more. Here's a downy woodpecker calling. So maybe there'll be a couple birds around here. And yep, there's the downy. Brief look, but you can see that short bill. And a robin sitting quietly in the tree. Another robin. Sounds like a red-bellied woodpecker calling. Something moving down in that little brush tangle. Huh, wow, it's a brown thrasher. That's a bird I very rarely see in the winter. Honestly, if I would have known we were going to see that, I probably would have made that our target bird. It's definitely a rarer bird than the meadowlark, even if they are around in the winter. Here's Carolina chickadee, a little bit more common, but the first one we've seen today. But yeah, wow, brown thrasher. It's definitely not one I expected. So this little detour is already working out pretty well. Even if we don't end up getting Eastern Meadowlark, that is definitely a little cherry on the top of today. Woodpecker's still calling in here, but everything else seems pretty quiet. There's a little field off to the left, but it looked mowed as well, so I didn't spend a lot of time on it. Got something here just ahead. And another Carolina wren. I guess when you see one, you start to see them all. That is the way birding goes very often. There's a weird call that is a eastern gray squirrel. Pretty strange sound. Take a little time to listen to this guy. As I've said before, I don't know a ton about mammals. I was kind of thinking this is the sound they call as sort of a breeding call to attract a mate, but the Carolina wren seems pretty upset with me, and it started calling after that, so maybe it's some sort of defensive call. I really am not too sure. Mammals are definitely not my strong suit, even if I do enjoy seeing them. Again, we've got another field off to the left, and again it looks mowed. I think think you can actually see hay bales out there, so that is not a great sign for Eastern Meadowlark. So we'll keep moving, try our luck a little further up. Yeah, definitely mowed. Couple of birds calling in here. Seems like there's something around. White-throated sparrow? White-throated sparrow calling. And yep, that one's a white-throated sparrow. A couple white-throated sparrows. Red-bellied woodpecker calling off in the distance. Towhee, another towhee calling. Be worth checking around, see if there's anything else. Again, these birds tend to move in flocks. And yeah, song sparrow. It does seem if you find a white-throated sparrow, there can't be a song sparrow too far away, so that is no surprise. And that might be all in this spot. Another just little cluster of sparrows. Something moving on the ground. Oh, it's a gray squirrel. Yep, okay. Maybe coming in to check out that other one making noise. I don't know. Alright, we'll keep moving. Definitely still a lot of sparrows calling. Blue jays off in the distance. But we'll keep moving. We can't stop for everything, I suppose, or this video would be even longer than it already is. But if we do come across something either new or perhaps just interesting, we'll stop and take a look at it. And here might be something like that now. Looks like another hermit thrush. And this one seems to have found some of the berries that attract a lot of birds to this park during the winter. And it's picking away at them. Another towhee calling off in the distance. Good 3 call. It's really neat to see these hermit thrushes today. Definitely much better than the last time. Ah, and there, as it flew away, another nice look at that red tail. Definitely still some white-throated sparrows, so seems to be a pretty birdy area on this north end of the park. This detour has worked out pretty well so far. Another bird up here on the path. And like often, it's another white-throated sparrow. But there was a nice little chuckle call. It seemed like a red-headed woodpecker, and yeah, sure enough, there it is. Not the best look at it, but hard to say if we'll get anything better, so we'll take a little bit of time to look. But that's definitely a bird that's worth getting a good look at, so we'll see what we can do. Ah, red-shouldered hawk calling off to the right. That's a pretty bird too, but I think I'd prefer to get a better look at the red-headed woodpecker, especially because that hawk sounds pretty far despite how loud it is. So we'll see if we can't get a better look at the red-headed woodpecker instead. And yeah. That's better. Yeah, what a beautiful bird. Really isn't another woodpecker like it here in Virginia. I love that big white patch on the wings, bright red head, the bill's even a little bluish, and if you get even a better look than this, you can notice a little black ring that goes around the red on the head, right at the throat, which is a pretty nice, intricate little marking. Alright, we'll keep making our way through, but brown thrasher, red-headed woodpecker, another nice look at hermit thrush. This has been a nice little detour. There's a ranch up here that's got a field that I don't think it's part of the park. I think it's private, but I have seen Eastern Meadowlarks on the fence posts here sometimes in the spring. Usually singing, which makes it a little bit easier and is often more when they perch up. Worth a look, but I didn't see anything there today. I kept an eye on those posts, but yeah, not much there. The field doesn't look mowed in that field, but it does look pretty grazed down by horses, so maybe not ideal winter habitat for Eastern Meadowlark anyways. We seem to have gotten out of that mixed flock that was mostly white-throated sparrows. The woods is a little bit quieter over in this section. We still have a couple more fields to check for Eastern Meadowlark, but I think we've gotten past the places that I think are most likely, so this might end up being the first target bird we miss, which is gonna be something that happens eventually. But you never know, we could still get it. But I think there's probably other parts of this park that we would find it in. There's a couple trails that tend to always be really nice and grassy, but those trails don't really have as good forest birds. And there's a couple other ones that tend to have some small fields that maybe don't get mowed as much, but I feel like they aren't as good for grassland birds on most trips. So I chose this trail because I feel like it's the best balance between grassland birds and forest birds. And then at the end, as you'll see, we go along the river, and so it just has the most diversity and tends to be my favorite trail in the park. But here's something we're stopping for. Here's some brown creepers up there. Maybe we'll get a little bit better look than this morning. And that is a bird creeping along a branch, but it's white-breasted nuthatch, which was actually with the creepers this morning, so no surprise. Looks like it's picking at the bark, and it found something in there. That's pretty cool. Let's see if we can get a look at these creepers. And yeah, there's one. As I said, yeah, it kind of looks like a little piece of bark moving on a branch. This is a little bit of a tough look, but better than this morning. And honestly, as good as I often see creepers, so I'm pretty pleased with that. Keep making our way along. There's another field up here, so another chance for some grassland birds, but it looks mostly mowed. There is a little bit of a grassy spot right there in the corner that'll be worth scanning. So take a quick look. But yeah, I don't see anything out there. It's tough, especially far away like that. There even could be meadowlarks sitting down in there, and it'd be hard to know. Winter is definitely a tougher time of year to get grassland birds than the spring or the summer. When birds aren't sitting up singing, it gets a little tougher to see them when they live in grass. I was hearing these titmice up here, so I was hoping to get a look at that, because we haven't seen a titmouse today, despite hearing them a few times, but that one there is a junco, and it seems like that flock moved off pretty quick. There's a bird up in the air, maybe another vulture? Oh no, it's a juvenile bald eagle. Probably a second-year bird, I would say. Not completely all black, it's got a little bit of color to it, but definitely doesn't have that white head and the white tail that you'd associate with a adult bald eagle. And off in the distance there's another red-headed woodpecker as well, so that's pretty fun. This little detour has a lot of good birds on it. I feel like maybe I need to do this section of this trail a little more often. I mean, even that bald eagle, I get bald eagles sometimes along the river at the end of this hike, but away from the river I very, very rarely see them, so that's something I don't really see very often at all either. Alright, we'll make our way through this forest section here, and then we'll be coming to the end of our detour, and we'll soon be back on the first Manassas Trail where we started. Definitely it was worth coming out here, even though we didn't get Eastern Meadowlark out here, because brown thrasher, red-headed woodpecker, even a bald eagle, definitely very cool birds. Better looks at hermit thrush and brown creeper. Definitely one of the highlights of the day so far was this little extra walk that I didn't necessarily plan to do, but sometimes you gotta make split decisions, and at least this time it worked out. It could have been a lot of extra walking for nothing. But the trail we're on here is actually the trail that horses are allowed on. Most of the trails they're not, but this one they are, and as you can see we're passing some horse riders here, so we'll let them go by and then we'll get on to this trail, which is the trail that we intended to walk. Out here is one of the last fields that we have the opportunity to look for meadowlarks in, and not only is it mowed, but it also looks pretty windy. both of those don't really help us, and while I'm sure we could potentially spot a Meadowlark in this field, it seems pretty unlikely. The mowed grass definitely doesn't help, but wind especially means it's even more unlikely that they'll perch up. A lot of times on windy days they sit a little bit lower, but seeing as this is our last chance, I'll take a few scans. It doesn't hurt. Even if we don't turn up Meadowlark, maybe we turn up something else. Worth a try. Really, we've racked up quite a good species list here, even if we don't have Eastern Meadowlark on it. As I said, this trail is my favorite because it's got the most diversity of habitats. So of all the trails, I tend to get my biggest species list here. I feel like that's really been the case today as well. We did end up getting a grassland bird in the form of Savannah Sparrow, and we got a lot of nice forest birds and birds that prefer brushy areas like the field sparrow and the brown thrasher. Really, we've seen most of what I would expect to see on a given day here at this park in the winter already. But there are still a few things we could get that would be new, and most of them are up just ahead. On the other side of this field, we'll get back into the forest, and then we'll make our way back along Bull Run, heading back towards the stone bridge. And in that area that has a little bit more water, a lot of times I can get water birds like great blue heron or belted kingfisher, and there's a lot of other things that just like hanging around the creek, so hopefully we'll get lucky and pick up a few more birds. Got a few more conifers in here, and sure enough there's a bird that we don't have yet in the form of golden crowned kinglet calling in these trees. We'll see if we can spot one. Saw one last time, but it'd be good to get another one here again today. And there's some motion, and that's not a golden crowned kinglet, but it might even be better. That is a very nice look at a red-breasted nuthatch, way better than we got at Ellanor Park. Definitely not the bird I thought I was going to see when I looked up, but happy to see it. The golden crowned kinglets, however, seem to have kind of moved off, so we might have to take a herd only for those unless we run into more further along the trail. But just down around this corner, we should be able to see the river, and so our chances of maybe finding other new things probably go up at that point. But at this point, we're away from all the fields, so I think we've missed our Eastern Meadowlark. I guess the only chance would maybe be at the parking lot. I don't think it's very likely that we would get them there, but I don't know. That parking lot has turned up some strange things, and there is a little bit of grass there, so we'll take a look. I think it's probably pretty unlikely, but it doesn't hurt to check. But I feel like that parking lot is always good for some little surprise right at the end of the trip. So we'll see if today we get lucky. The river down here is looking a bit green, to be honest, but also looks like it's got a sheen of ice over the top, which is probably not going to help us in our quest to find any sort of water bird like great blue heron, belted kingfisher, or mallard. Couple birds moving on the other side of the water, so we'll stop and take a look. And it is dark-eyed junco. Yeah, that makes sense. There have been a few calling along the trail, so that is something I might expect. Couple birds calling here still along this edge. Tufted titmouse, a few other things. They sound relatively far back in the woods, so even though we haven't seen a tufted titmouse yet today, I think those ones are gonna probably not be the ones we see. This area tends to be pretty good for herons and that sort of thing, but I don't see any today. There is a bird up higher in the air. And another bald eagle. Possibly the same one, but we've moved far enough. I think probably a second one, but definitely another young bird in the same age class. We're starting to get back pretty close to the stone bridge now. Not too much further up here. You can start to hear the traffic from the road again. This little section of the river was a little quieter than sometimes it can be, but we're getting a little bit later in the morning, so maybe it's just that. Yep, you can start to see the stone bridge peeking through the trees, so we're almost back. So we're getting to the end of what has been quite a long bird walk, but a very good one. And unless the parking lot has any surprises for us, we've probably seen what we're going to see at this point. But can't stop birding till we get back to the car, so if we can find anything else, we'll certainly look for it. The area around the river is definitely a lot quieter than it was this morning, as is this section along the trees, which I suppose is to be expected at this time of day. You can see the parking lot coming up ahead, but potentially it looks like we do have something up there in the sky that's worth looking at. And yeah, black vultures. So there's another one for us. You can see those very short tails. To me, they look like almost like semicircles in the sky, whereas the turkey vultures look more T-shaped. And yeah, back in the parking lot at this field, and it does actually look like there's some bird here, so we'll take a quick look. Nice male red-bellied woodpecker, not something we haven't seen already. But wait, there's something down at the base of the tree too. Ah, nice! Eastern phoebe. Now there's a good bird to end on. That's another one of these half-hardy birds that sticks around here in the winter in Virginia that I don't necessarily expect to see when I go out, so definitely a pretty surprising bird, and possibly something I see even less than Eastern Meadowlark here. So despite the fact that we didn't see it, we've got a ton of nice birds. So I think we'll end it there. As always, we'll go through our walk summary. We got a whopping 42 species of birds with 2 species of mammals in about 6 miles walked in 4 hours and 20 minutes. And we missed our target bird for the first time on virtual birding, and surely not the last. The species list is going to run for you here on the screen, and as always, if there's birds that we only heard, it'll have that HO next to it. Anything new for our virtual birding life list will have an N, and birds that we've seen for the first time but we've heard previously will have an S. Yeah, a brown thrasher. That one still gets me. I mean, we may have missed our target bird, but that one's the bird of the day for me. That's definitely a bird I did not expect when I left the house this morning, and definitely a really nice treat. If you had a favorite bird, let me know. Finally, our virtual birding life list with now 48 species of birds after 20 new ones today. We also even added 1 extra mammal for 2 species total. Thanks for coming on this walk at the battlefield with me today. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and happy birding.